Tim, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for having a conversation with me today. Quite possibly the most important question for our conversation. What's your coffee order?
Oh, well, it's great to be here, Matthew, and thank you for having me. My coffee order is actually a long black with cold milk on the side. So I've
Fantastic.
moved through a manifestation of coffees, but now I'm Melbourne based. I do find the long black's the way to go.
Lovely. And a book that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life. It could be personally or professionally.
Now, I'm not going to be original here because I know that others on your podcast have spoken to this book, but it's absolutely Oliver Burkeman's 4,000 Weeks. And I think you might have actually interviewed Oliver on a previous podcast episode.
I did, and I'll email through the link to that. He is as wonderful in real life as he is on paper. And he was just so generous and so amazing with this time. I mean, what was it about 4,000 Weeks that stood out?
I think that that idea that life isn't a list to get through and that time is finite really impacted me. So it's moved me to be more outcome focused rather than simply task oriented and recognizing that you can't shift time. It raises the question, how are you going to use it to best effect? And so that was a real shift in actually the way that I operate both at work and also in life.
Yeah, interesting. And something that you're going to stop doing in 2026. And if you say podcast interviews with people from Sydney, I will be devastated.
Absolutely not podcasts. Something that I really am working on is this idea of not moving too fast to premature closure. So, that idea that underlying our human disposition, we're not really comfortable with discomfort. And the ability to sit in discomfort, whether that's personal or professional, as you think more deeply about issues at hand rather than rushing to come to a solution so everyone can get out of the room. I really believe is what is needed now in a world that is just so dynamic and changing so quickly. It's
Mm.
what's needed now to come up with answers that are better,
Yeah,
actually.
I think that's really important, Tim. For those that are not aware, tell me a little bit about your role with AITSL and what first drew you to the position.
So my role at AITSL is as the Chief Executive Officer. AITSL is a Commonwealth government-owned company that is responsible for a range of matters, but they all pertain to teachers and school leaders. So we are responsible for the teacher standards, steaming the profession, providing supports for teachers and school leaders, but we also do a lot of work around data insights around teacher workforce. And I'm really excited this year we're moving into foresight. So, what does the future of teaching and school leadership look like in 2040? I was drawn after many years running an education system actually in Tasmania to
Mm.
AITSL because I truly believe that supporting teachers and school leaders to be the very best that they can is the most impactful thing that we can do nationally, but also as systems and sectors to raise outcomes for all learners in Australia. So I suppose after sitting in running a system and looking at where we could have biggest impact and influence, this was a natural progression for me.
Tim, what were you like at school? And was there a teacher that made a difference in your life?
Now, that is a great question because I obviously grew up and went to school in Tasmania. And because Tasmania is such a small place, one of my favourite teachers ended up being a direct report to me as Secretary of Education.
That's interesting.
There were reflections of me, I think, probably better than my own reflections. I think that diligent and wanting to do well and do the right thing, but also a big talker. And probably it's the talking which I've made a career out of, interestingly.
Was she surprised when you became her boss?
No, she was actually very supportive and incredibly pleased. And I remember turning up to my first meeting with a level of nervousness that I was going to have someone who taught me actually for 4 years in high school. And what I got from her was a hug, which I thought was a great welcome.
Yeah, I think that's really lovely. What was school like for you? And what's a memorable moment about one of the teachers that you had?
Look, I think school was a mixed bag for me. I went to a school, and look, this is the 80s, so it's quite a different world to now. But to be good at sport was what made you sort of accepted and I suppose seen as being successful. a young person who was very creative and interested in the arts and drama and music. So I sometimes felt like I was sort of on the boundaries of what was valued. But in those classes of music and drama and English and literature and the things that I love, I learnt that having those passions was absolutely a marker of success. And I was really supported. I was very fortunate to be supported to pursue those interests. And one thing that stood out for me was an absolute willingness of the teachers in those classes to meet me where I was at in terms of providing me with other stimulus or other books or other music that they thought was of interest, even though it sat outside the curriculum. And I'm forever grateful for that. And also, too, the most important thing was a belief in my ability to be successful and having teachers who spoke directly to that. So some of the most memorable conversations which were, we believe in you and your ability to be successful.
That's so important. And I've had the privilege of speaking to so many wonderful educators on this podcast, and it's really lovely to hear when people describe their favorite teacher or how they felt at school. They never really talk about content. I've never heard somebody say, I loved Mr. Smith because he taught me fractions or whatever that may be. And I think it's a good reminder that students remember how we made them feel in their classrooms. And I love the work that AITSL is doing is so important because, as you mentioned before, it sets a really high standard, an unapologetically high standard for teachers, because we are in the profession that holds so much power and so much influence in the lives of young people. I think it's just so incredibly important. When you think about the next 5 years, what's the shift in teaching or school leadership that you most hope to bring to life across Australia?
Look, I think there's a couple of aspects to that, and I've been in the role for sort of close to a year and a half, so I've had an opportunity to work with educators nationally. And there are a few things that I think we've really got to nail in terms of the profession. The first is actually confidence. So we need to build the confidence of the profession to see that the job that they're doing is not only important, but that they're doing it well. Really concerns me that often the sort of the quick clickbait narratives that we see rolling out in the media is sort of teaching and learning Armageddon, whereas we know that there is so much capacity and capability within the profession to make a real difference. And often it's that they don't see that in themselves. There was a standout piece of data that we got from some research that we did, and I think it was around 40% of teachers felt that they were valued and trusted.
Wow.
And yet close to 90% of members of the Australian public valued and trusted teachers. So there's a real disconnect between the perception and the reality, and I want to build that bridge. The other, I think, is around building capability in terms of being able to deal with the world as it is now and how dynamic it is. You know, I think that there are elements around resilience and ability to manage change, to pivot, etc., that move beyond that technical capability and actually build in some other capabilities that will help teachers not only survive, but thrive in a world. We're never going back to pre-COVID. So how do we build that? And finally, the sense of connection. So where I see the profession absolutely flourishing is where teachers and school leaders feel connected to one another, to their learners and to their school communities. But likewise, things that concern me is that sort of thing that can roll out in some of our learning environments where you become quite isolated from your peers or from your profession because you're in a classroom every day just getting on with the work. And we know that teachers flourish best when they're working together. So how do we build that sense, not only in a school, but across the whole profession of being connected to others who are doing the important work you're doing? And how do we build your sort of understanding and capability and support networks through that?
I have so many questions, Tim, and thank you for answering that so eloquently. So you've spoken often about improving outcomes for children and young people. What does this look like in practice? And when you think about the national educational landscape. So what does this look like?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really, really interesting question, especially when we're talking about a national context. So what we know is that children and young people are complex and they're individuals. And in my previous role, as well as being the Secretary for Education, I was also the guardian for 1,000 children and young people in Tasmania. And my child advocate, who was there to sort of focus me, the children in my care said to me once, look, children are not projects, they're people. And we've got to actually recognise that in whatever we do to improve teaching and learning, the child and the attributes and dispositions of the individuals need to be front and centre. So nationally, we've got to keep focused on that. It's really easy when you're up in a big machine that's a bureaucracy with lots of policies and processes to actually get distracted and believe that's the work. And lifting learner outcomes is the work. So I think the first thing nationally is keeping focused on learners in classrooms. The second thing I'll say is we need to be really clear about where you can add impact nationally. What we know and what you know is the biggest impact is in a classroom.
Absolutely.
So that's local and contextual. And so the question then to answer is, why would we be doing work nationally? Like, there are many, many good answers to that, but being very clear that to have meaningful influence, you need to ensure that a national remit's appropriate. And the third thing I think we need to be much, much more focused on is assessment for impact. So education systems are not great at evaluating the impact of initiatives that they've put in place. And look, that is because often there are so many variables at play about why a school or a classroom or a learner might flourish and why they don't. But we've got to have that front of mind. If we're rolling something out, how do we know that that's the best thing to do? And how do we know that we want to keep doing it or adjust it? Or actually, how do we know whether we want to decommission it and try something else? So that loop is sometimes closed, but I don't think enough. And so when we're doing things now at AITSL, we are asking a question of how will we know that we've been successful? And what will we do if we haven't?
It's so important, Tim. My youngest daughter has just finished kindergarten and my eldest is just about to go into year 3. And it is a joy as a parent every day to see them skipping off to school. They adore their teachers. They go to a wonderful local public school. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind explaining if and how being a parent has changed you. How has it changed your approach to educational standards and what's important?
I think that it's absolutely focused me on that idea of every child as an individual. And it's interesting, isn't it, when you're placed in a position where your own child maybe isn't benefiting. Well, actually, you feel that your own child isn't seen by a school or a system. And so therefore you want to make sure that they can maximise their full potential given their particular attributes. And I think what that does is really focus you on that idea of equity. So I already had that with 2 children. When I went to sort of 1,002 as the guardian, it became even more amplified. That underlying system, there is an idea that we really need to push, which is equity, that every child can reach their full potential, and therefore systems need to adjust to ensure that there's a level of differentiation in that system to allow that to occur. Now, that is difficult, and some people will say that means teachers. Now we've got to teach across 25 children, and that's very hard. There's more work I think we need to do as systems and sectors to ensure that we provide a range of learning experiences and a range of learning environments to meet the needs of all learners, not necessarily meaning that a classroom has to do that, because that's a very, very big ask for teachers, I think.
I am incredibly proud to work in public education in New South Wales. I have also worked in the independent sector, but I'm currently an assistant principal, and I have really seen firsthand the value of a large system. And so I can pick up a phone and call a local public school up the road or have a conversation about how best to support a student, how to deal with challenging behavior, how to support parents. And it's incredibly beneficial, I think, to be able to do that. And so I'm so grateful for the collegiality, and I can only speak on behalf of the New South Wales public education system, but it's so wonderful to have that shared expertise across multiple contexts. There is that really high standard of what it is to be a great teacher. So incredibly grateful for the work that you're doing in that space to make sure that every kid has access to that. But I'd love you to be able to maybe unpack how we can continue to encourage people to see teaching as a great profession.
We really need to find a way through multiple channels to champion the value of teachers.
Agree.
In my previous careers, worked in what you might boringly term economic policy and productivity. The reason that I was drawn more and more into education is that is the only thing that is going to manifestly improve the lives of individuals, but also lift a national economy. That job is incredibly powerful in terms of changing the lives of individuals for the better, but also lifting the productivity of a nation. That is not a message that I think sits in society enough. So I've been in a world where I have managed now, because of my age, multiple generations of people coming into the workforce. And I can see now that the attributes of 20-year-olds and what they expect and want in terms of their life and work are very, very different from people of my generation, Generation X. And yet teaching is still very much, if you like, an industrial construct in terms of you're there 5 days a week for these hours doing this job. And the next wave, I think, of transformation in education is really looking at learning and learning environments and the way that they operate, the role of teachers, to ensure that we are releasing or maximising the amazing potential of teachers in a way that also meets their life choices. So there's a bit to be done there.
And my hope is that this conversation will get people thinking and get people engaging with some of the amazing research that you at AITSL have put out. What do you think are some of the qualities of an excellent teacher?
It's something that we obviously spend a long time thinking about, and we're just going through thinking about it again because we've been asked to put forward a proposal around just reviewing the teacher standards and saying, are they reflecting what's needed now?
Interesting.
So we are looking at that. But I think that there are skills and knowledge, absolutely, and we know that more and more, and especially through the work of Aero and also through universities, that evidence base about what works and why is forever changing and growing. And we need to make sure we harness and articulate that. But I would argue that dispositions are equally, if not more, important. So, as we discussed at the beginning of the conversation, my reflection to you was actually around teachers who'd formed a human connection with me and who had been able to see the potential in me as a learner and be able to support and grow that, but also to provide me with the confidence to know that I could go on and be successful. So that voice in my head. And I think we hear a lot about AI and AI taking over the role of teachers and doing the work of teachers. I'd actually argue that we need to keep human connection front and centre of this conversation. And we need to ensure that we are building the capability and disposition in teachers to maximise that human connection for learners. Children and young people need adults who believe in them to thrive. And from that belief, everything else will flow.
It's incredibly important, Tim. And I think if we miss that, it's not just about the impartation of knowledge, but it is that human connection. And I think about the teachers that made a huge difference in my life. I knew that they cared. They were brilliant practitioners, but I just knew that they cared. How do we balance that need for robust national data with the understanding that schools and communities are so diverse and vary so widely across our country? How do we do both?
Well, part of the work that we do at AITSL is on behalf of education ministers nationally run the Australian Teacher Workforce data set. And what's exciting me around that data set and the potential of it is how many ways we are now able to cut the data so that we are getting some of that contextually specific information. The last Australian Teacher Workforce survey that we've published, what we were able to look at regional and remote, high SES, low SES communities, early career, late career teachers, school leaders, etc. And people have said to me, well, what was your biggest take out of looking at that data set? And getting back to that question of differentiation as in classrooms, it was we're expecting of teachers the ability to differentiate, but as system sectors and nationally, we're not doing it ourselves.
Interesting.
And the stories that were coming through that data set showed people had very different experiences depending on where they were in their career life cycle or where they were situated geographically or what their experience had been. And so my takeout from that is teachers are not a homogenous mass where you can put in a support or an expectation and expect that's to work for everyone. So if I just take a couple of very simple examples, early career teachers, biggest stressor was behaviour management. Experienced teachers, biggest stressor was technology. So, we could waste a lot of time of experienced teachers helping them to do behaviour management when actually they just want to know, how on earth do I get into this Teams environment and actually roll out solutions? And likewise, one of the biggest impacts on teachers in rural and remote communities was the very, very close connection that they had with that community. So having to live within the community that they were teaching brought about a whole lot of social and psychological impacts, which in a large city where you leave work and you go back to your suburb and you're not going to supermarkets with parents, etc., means that you're having a really different experience.
Absolutely. I mean, they're always I have had so many conversations with people about what is missing and what we're doing really well with initial teacher education. I'd love you to maybe unpack the role that AITSL plays in shaping this. Tell me a little bit about some of the programs that you've got in place for initial teacher education, and what are some of the things that you're working on at the moment?
Well, it's a great question, and just to sort of frame up initial teacher education, as people may know, there are really run by universities, and universities set the course, I suppose the curriculum that's taught and the assessment tasks. But more and more nationally, there's been that call for some national consistency, with employers really wanting to say, well, what's the product that we're getting coming into our schools, and how do we know they're at standard and quality? So AITSL is responsible for the national standards and accreditation guidelines for initial teacher education. We don't regulate or police those. That's done individually in states and territories, but we do set up that framework. And really, we're bringing the teacher standards down into prerequisites for courses and course requirements. So we are very active in that space, and we work very closely with state and territory regulatory authorities, and also with the Australian Council of Education Deans around what they look like and how they're going to roll out. But more recently, we have been working on the teacher practice assessment. So as part of a course, you need to go through this as an individual. And one of the things that became clear, or I would say a question that arose, is how do we know that those assessments are being undertaken in a way that is very measured and equitable? And so we've been running a moderation process, which has just been fascinating, to set a benchmark for what you would expect those assessments, how the assessment should be undertaken and what you would be expecting them to be achieved. And that's work in progress and will roll out over a number of years. And the other thing I think too is just working with providers, so universities, to understand what the future of teaching and school leadership looks like. So, we're very active in the area. It's an absolutely fascinating area, and I really, really value being able to work with the Council of Education Deans around this and regulators, because really it's around getting that shared understanding about what we expect.
That's amazing. I feel like we're getting breaking news today with some of the stuff that AITSL is working on. It's really wonderful to see it. And can I just say that the resources that are coming from AITSL, as someone who is on the ground doing the job, the resources are great. They're really useful and really practical. And one of my frustrations at times with research is you go to an education conference or you read a book, and I always ask the question, what does that actually look like for me when I stand in front of my class tomorrow? And it's amazing to see the resources written by AITSL are just really practical. And you can tell that they're written by teachers and educators and people that genuinely care. And it's really wonderful. So a bit of feedback from the ground there. Keep up the great work. It's really awesome.
Really appreciate that. And I'm interested and pleased that you used the word useful. I think that's an underlying question that we constantly ask ourselves. So we know it's very easy to put out a whole lot of stuff so that you can say you've done it. How's it going to be used? Why is it useful? Who's it for? Are questions that we're consistently asking. And I'm just going to give you another bit of breaking news and a plug. Through the course of next year, we will relaunched the AITSL website. Front and centre of that is how can you, at your career stage and with your area of interest, quickly access the resources that are going to be useful now.
Amazing.
So that's been our sort of front and centre, if you like, business proposition. It's a website for educators, and it has amazing amount of use now, but we want you as a busy teacher to be able to get in, find what you need quickly, and be able to deploy it on the ground.
I love that, Tim. I'll keep refreshing my AITSL website, and hopefully that will change.
We're thinking at the moment, Matthew, mid-year, so
no problem. Tim, I love your passion and how proud you are of the work that we're doing in Australia to support teachers and just the brilliant profession that we're involved in. What are some of the, and you've worked extensively overseas and traveled internationally a lot. What are some things we should be really proud of in Australia with our education system? What are the things that really stand out that people go, wow, that's phenomenal what we're doing?
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of things. Where would you start? But look, equity, I think, is something we should be very, very proud of. I think, especially through the work that we've done on disability, for example, that idea of inclusion, you don't always see that in other international systems. There is an idea of delineation, differentiation, but it does tend to move into streaming. Yeah. And the idea that all learners are welcome in all Australian classrooms and we'll do the best that we can by them, I think is something that we should hold very true and really, really celebrate. And the other thing I think that we should be proud of actually is the professionalism of our teachers and school leaders. It's really interesting when you go internationally, something like teacher standards and something like AITSL, you do not find those all around Australia, all around the world. We are quite unique in our, I would say, our ongoing work to bring together that sense of a very professional and expert profession. And we should really be celebrating and keeping working on that as we go forward. And the other, I would have to say, really is probably the focus that we have got more on that idea of a whole child and how we support the individual be successful holistically. So, we obviously have an Australian curriculum, and as you've said, it builds knowledge and skills, but we also have an emphasis on cross-curriculum priorities and capabilities. And we aren't just that sort of chalk and talk, let's fill up a vessel with information system. We really are trying to attend to all aspects of a human to ensure that they can succeed in life.
There's so many teachers that have been involved in our profession for many years, and they've lost that spark and they've lost that excitement for why we do what we do. How do you personally remain so passionate about this cause that you're involved in, and how do you make sure that you keep students at the centre of what you do?
Look, I had a very wise deputy secretary who on a very bleak day in public education said to me, I think you need to go out and visit a kindergarten class.
We all do, yeah.
And I don't know that you're staying grounded enough in the reality of the amazing work that schools do. Right. It is quite easy to get sucked into a vortex of social media, mainstream media, results, etc., which can build a very dark narrative at times about education and its perils. But when you go and actually meet with young people, children and young people themselves, when you see them enjoying the learning that they're taking part in, when you see them following a line of inquiry that they're passionate about, you can't come back to the office and think this work isn't important. So I know that there are at times teachers and school leaders who feel jaded and overworked and quite frankly probably underappreciated. But the sort of diligence I think I've brought is let's see where we have been successful, whose life are we managing to bring about positive change in, and how do I celebrate and reward myself for the part that I'm playing in that, rather than being stuck in a doom narrative.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice. If I'm having a challenging day, I always just call into kindergarten and you feel like a hero. They compliment you on how much they love your shirt or how young you look, even though you've had a shocking day. And I think there's nothing like the wonderful naivety of 5 and 6 year olds to put a bit of a a pep in your step. It's really wonderful.
Yeah, I went through a phase when I was working in public education down in Tasmania where sometimes I had a beard and sometimes I didn't have a beard. One of the kindergarten's games was if you're going to have a beard or not have a beard today.
I love
I
that.
walk into a kindergarten room, they go, "He's got a beard."
I love that. I wore shorts for the first time a little while ago because I'm usually in meetings and you've always got to
Yeah,
be ready just in case a parent needs to meet with you. And so it was a really hot day and I thought, I'm just going to wear shorts. And I just remember this young girl in kindergarten. She couldn't stop looking at my knees. And I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "Mr. Green, you've got knees." And I showed them
yeah.
that I showed her that I could bend my knees, and she was just
Fascinating.
amazed. Yeah, it was really wonderful.
Fascinating.
Tim, I do want to be respectful of your time. So I just have one final question, if you don't mind. If I was sitting down with you, we were having a long black with milk on the side, and I was just about to step into the teaching profession for the first time, what short bit of advice would you give me?
I would give you two bits of advice, I think. One is make sure that you look after your well-being as well as the well-being of your learners, your resilience, your ability to bounce back and your ability to lift their learning is so attached to your own well-being. And the other is be a learner. I know that sounds very obvious, but you're going in to the profession at the beginning of a long journey of continuous learning for yourself. And I think being cognizant of the fact you are a learner, providing yourself permission to be a learner and looking for opportunities to continue to learn is what is going to make you a great teacher.
I love that. Tim, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. It has been absolutely wonderful to get to have a conversation with you and unpack some of the amazing work that AITSL's doing. As someone who is on the ground doing the job, I really do appreciate it. And thank you for your leadership and your passion and just the sense of wonder that you bring to our incredible profession. So I can't thank you enough for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Matthew. It's been a joy talking to you.
Thank you.